story time, Poggies. So, if you don't know, and you should know because I've made videos on it, I work a job doing fish identification. We look at fish that pass through a fish passage in a dam in New Jersey, and we try to identify which ones are which. And generally what we're looking at is American shad and gizzard shad and river herring. And that's like our main goal of what we're paying attention to. But we sometimes see other things. Oftentimes, actually, we see a variety of other species. And so when those come along, we might as well identify them. Although it's not the main purpose of the project, it's still good to have all of that data. So we identify everything that we come across. And although there's, probably 30 species that we regularly see, we do occasionally get stuff that we just do not often see. We come across a species that we haven't seen or we didn't expect to be there. And actually how I got involved in the project in the first place was that they saw a carp go through the fish passage and they didn't recognize it as a common carp or a mirror carp, something you'd find around here. And they couldn't really determine what it was because it was very murky. And so they sent the video to me to help them with the carp. And it turned out to be a grass carp, which was invasive. And we had to alert the New Jersey state government that there was a new invasive species in that river. So there's actually some pretty huge impacts of finding random fish that we don't expect to be in there. But occasionally, we just find some super weird stuff, where something just comes through the dam that just doesn't make sense and no one knows how to do it. And that's when we all come together. So there's like 6 of us that work on this project. And when you find something super weird, everyone gets together to try and figure out what it is. All right. So I'm going to play for you real quick this video. This is the video that was sent to me. This is what I am trying to identify. They basically sent this out and they said, hey, one of our watchers saw this come through the dam and we have absolutely no clue what it is. All right. It's very confusing. So let's take a look. So this fish right here comes through. So far, it looks fairly normal, right? But as you progress, look at the shape. So the obvious conclusion here is it looks like a smallmouth bass. It's got those lines on the gills that look like a smallmouth bass. It's got the smallmouth bass, tail and everything, but it has a big ass hump, right? So you'd think, okay, smallmouth bass, but why does it have the hump? Okay, so it has the shape of a white perch, but the face of a smallmouth bass. So if you don't know, let's take a look. So white perch, maybe it doesn't have it as bad. You can see that it has this shape a little bit. Maybe a freshwater drum would be a better example. Yeah, so look at the way that the drum sort of levels itself up. That's sort of the shape that this fish has. It has that drum-like shape. But if you look at a smallmouth bass, you'll see those lines on the face on the operculum are very distinctive. I mean, it's like one of the most identifiable features of a smallmouth bass. So when you've got something that looks exactly like a smallmouth bass but has this hump to be shaped like a drum, suddenly we're thinking of other interesting possibilities. And so basically everyone was trying to figure out what species this could be. We're trying to come up with, people are thinking about hybrids. People are thinking about maybe like Suwannee bass, which is one of the things I considered, which isn't typically found around here, but has more of like a hump-like shape to it. Not this dramatic though. And that's what caught me, because a lot of people were thinking, okay, maybe it's a hybrid, maybe it's, a variety of things. I guess you could theoretically have a drum/bass. And so we looked at a lot of various possibilities. Another confusing thing is you'll see the dorsal fin back here is pointy, which you don't usually see. It could be damaged a little bit, but you don't usually see that on bass, on that family. So there's a lot of weird things going on, but all of our normal identification characteristics other than shape would tell us it's a smallmouth. So other people were looking at hybrid possibilities. Other people were looking at, various species we haven't seen, trying to look truly into the genus, like going through the Wikipedia page. And I thought about something that I had seen. So I actually do reading. It's part of my job. I do study, obviously. And I have this book called Fish Diseases and Medicine, which I study and take notes from and everything, and have a notebook. Just helps me, learn things better. And I specifically remembered that in this book, there's a section on, spinal deformities. Because I originally was thinking, okay, if it's definitely a smallmouth bass, maybe it has a tumor or something growing. But it looks way too large to be a tumor, right? And tumors generally are on the outside. And even if a tumor was on the inside, it would look like a concentrated spot with, skin going over it. It really wouldn't be like an organized bump like that. The only thing that I could come up with that would look like an organized bump like that is a spinal deformity. And so I found, in this book, Remembering My Notes, I found this thing called kyphosis. And kyphosis is a spinal deformity where the back sort of arches upwards. So, there's scoliosis, and then there's kyphosis, and then there's lordosis. And those are different deformities of the spine. Kyphosis is like a hunchback, whereas lordosis is the opposite, right? So the belly comes out, the back goes down. And so what I saw in this video looked to me like kyphosis, right? Where the head is pretty normal, and then the back humps upwards. And so all that was left was to find some sort of evidence that this is what I think this is. And so I'm looking through these pictures for kyphosis in fish on Google, and I'm finding mostly the spinal cord tends to be deformed closer to the caudal fin. Like this seems to this seems to be the really common thing, right? Right before the caudal fin, there's a deformity. And so I got a little bit discouraged, and I was like, well, I guess it's not this, because I don't see any deformity that looks like the back hunches up, right? That's not something I see anywhere here. And then I came across this image, and this image solved everything for me. I found a paper on deformities in fish, which had a specific chart image of a smallmouth bass normal and a smallmouth bass deformed with kyphosis. And when you put that, side by side with this guy, it's pretty clear that that is what we have here. This guy's lines aren't as, showing as well, but you can clearly see that that's what we're working with here. And so through this process of trying to look at different species, trying to look at hybrids, trying to look at like various ways that this could happen, I went through tumors and growths, eventually landed on this specific image, which proved that it was just a spinally deformed smallmouth bass, which I thought was pretty dope. Poor fishy. Well, he's large enough. So the way that spinal deformities work is generally they're not something you're born with. They're something that you develop over time via stress. So he was a fairly large smallmouth bass, the one that we saw pass through the dam. So he probably lived, a long life doing what he was doing, and then started to deform. And that's usually when fish tend to reach their end, is when the spine starts deforming. That's something you see a lot in aquarium fish. They start to swim weird, some kind of swim bladder issues or liver infections, and then their spine starts to deform. And once your fish in an aquarium spinally deforms, they're probably fucked. But there's also the possibility that he had that spinal deformity his entire life. He was born with it, and has managed to survive despite that, because smallmouth bass aren't exactly making large migrations. So theoretically, it's obviously a disadvantage. You could still survive. It's not such a disadvantage that it's not like having no fins, And that is story time.